My name is Maria, and this happened to my aunt. This story takes place in 2011 in Damascus, Syria, during the early years of the war. What started as a peaceful protest against the Assad regime quickly escalated into a brutal conflict. The demonstrations, driven by a desperate demand for change, were met with violence. The government responded with overwhelming force, detaining and disappearing men and boys from their homes. Fear settled over entire neighborhoods, and my aunt, her husband, and their children lived through this terror firsthand. Every night at exactly midnight, protests erupted beneath my aunt's building. Almost all men in the neighborhoods gathered in the streets, their voices rising in unison as they chanted, "We want freedom," their cries echoing against the concrete walls. The government was always listening, always watching, but not because they were concerned about anything their citizens had to say. They were keeping them in check. Armed soldiers patrolled the streets with orders to silence any sign of resistance. One by one, the men of my aunt's neighborhood were gunned down, their bodies left in the streets as a warning to others. Those who weren't killed were taken. Husbands, brothers, and sons dragged from their homes, never to be seen again. The lucky ones were hidden away by their families, some managing to escape, while others were discovered and taken to prisons where they would never leave. From the last floor of her apartment, my aunt could smell the sharp, metallic scent of blood contaminating the air. Every night, the gunfire returned, rattling through the walls, making her flinch. She lived in constant fear, dreading the moment the bullets would pierce her home, or worse, soldiers would come for her husband, just as they had so many others. One evening, my aunt was standing by the window, listening to the distant chants, when she noticed movement outside. A group of soldiers had gathered, rifles slung over their shoulders, scanning the balconies above them. Then, one of them looked up. Their eyes met. For an instant, he just stared. Then, without hesitation, he raised his rifle and fired. Glass shattered around my aunt as she threw herself backward, shielding her face. The gunfire was deafening, reverberating through the apartment. Her children screamed as she scrambled to get them away from the windows. Bullets tore through the walls, sending dust and debris into the air. Then suddenly, silence. A moment later came a relentless pounding against the door. "Open the door," a voice barked. My aunt and her grandmother, who had been visiting that evening, exchanged a silent glance. Nobody moved. The knocking grew louder and more forceful. They knew that by opening the door, it could mean an unspeakable fate. Time passed unbearably. Finally, the footsteps outside faded, but the night's horrors were far from over. An hour later, the sound of heavy boots returned, many more this time. The soldier had brought reinforcements. The door burst open, and soldiers began searching the apartment, tearing through furniture, ripping paintings from the walls, and flipping mattresses. They were looking for anything that they could justify taking someone away. My aunt's husband had a gun hidden inside the house. If the soldiers found it, he would be arrested, and they might have never seen him ever again. As the troops ransacked the home, my grandmother clutched my aunt's trembling hands. One soldier paused at the exact spot where the gun was hidden. He hesitated for a brief moment before moving on. Then, as quickly as they had arrived, they left. The gun was never found. My aunt's husband was never taken. But that night would change everything. Their home was no longer a safe place. It was a battleground, Yet despite the fear, they never left. My aunt and her family still live in that same apartment to this day, with memories of that night lingering in every bullet-ridden wall. When I visit Syria, my aunt takes me for walks around the neighborhood, pointing out the scars the war has left behind. On one such visit, she showed me a shattered piece of concrete near her home. This pillar once blocked the vantage point to our apartment window. Had it not been here, we may not be alive today. When I was 15, about to turn 16, I lived in a small town in North Carolina and used to hang out at the local bowling center with one of my best friends. Her name was Haley. My dad was in a bowling league that night, and Haley came by to work on a class project. It was on a Wednesday night, by far the biggest league night at the bowling center, which made it a bit crowded. There were no empty tables at the lanes, so Haley and I went into the lounge in the back and grabbed a table. Once we sat down, I noticed a guy sitting at the bar watching TV and drinking a beer. I didn't recognize him, which was somewhat odd because regulars didn't typically hang out back here, especially on league nights, and most out-of-towners didn't know about this back lounge. It wasn't closed off to the public, but it was sort of hidden, so I figured the guy must have just opened the doors and decided to watch some TV. Haley and I worked on our class project for a few minutes, and then the stranger turned around in his chair to look at us. He looked fairly young, maybe in his mid-20s. He smiled and greeted us, and we began making small talk. Then he asked us how old we were. Haley, being the social butterfly she is, answered, telling him that she was 16 and I was 15. "Oh, so do you guys drive yet?" "I do. She doesn't because she's still a baby," Haley teased. At the time, I only had my learner's permit. They continued their conversation about what kind of vehicles they drove, and they found out that they both drove trucks. This is where the conversation got a little strange. "My truck is out in the parking lot if you guys want to come check it out. It's brand new. I'll even take you for a ride if you want." Alarms start going off in my head. This guy was a grown adult, and he knew we were jailbait, but that didn't seem to deter him one bit. Hey, my dad told me to come check in by 9. Can you come with me?" I told Haley as I glanced at my watch. That was a lie. My dad trusted me, but I knew that we had to get out of the situation and let the guy know that we weren't completely alone and unsupervised. He must have sensed my discomfort because he then attempted to apologize. "Oh, I know that sounded kind of weird. Sorry if I gave you the wrong idea." But what he said next made the situation even creepier. "I mean, it's not like you two would get in my truck, and then I lock the doors, and you'd wake up 8 hours later in Fayetteville." After that remark, you could hear a pin drop in the lounge. He didn't say that in a joking manner, and now he was just staring at us, not even breaking eye contact when he took another swig of his beer. Part of me wanted to ask him if we had to fill out an application before he kidnapped us, but Haley seemed to pick up that we were talking to one of Ted Bundy's long-lost sons and grabbed my arm. We both left the lounge in a hurry, looking over our shoulders to make sure we weren't being followed. I went to my dad's table and told him what happened. He followed me back to the lounge to confront the guy, but when we opened the door, he was gone. Not even 5 minutes had passed between us leaving the lounge and coming back with my dad. The man had disappeared, only leaving behind a half-drunk beer on the counter. We never saw him again after that night. If you were around and can remember, think back to the weeks immediately following September 11th, 2001. Everything was America, especially in the South, and definitely in North Carolina, where I lived. There's a large number of military installations here, including a massive army base about an hour from my hometown. Nearly every car, at minimum, had an American flag bumper sticker, and a frightening majority of people thought anyone who had skin darker than a potato chip was a potential terrorist. Everyone was hyper-vigilant, and many people took this as an excuse to become overly interested in the lives of their neighbors, sometimes out of concern for their neighbors' safety, sometimes out of concern for themselves. I was 8 years old, and I was pretty sure my elementary school wasn't going to be a target of any massive terrorist attacks, and neither did my parents. So my brother and I continued to walk to school each day. This was never a problem. We walked to school every day that didn't have totally awful weather for almost all of my grade school existence. My neighborhood even had paved walking trails, including one that led directly to my elementary school. I can't remember if it was because of recent rain flooding the creek beside the trail, or just the climate in general making bugs come out in full force, but that week, my brother and I decided to take a different route and walk along the road. This plan went off without a hitch, until we were walking home one day in a black SUV with tinted windows and a giant American flag that blocked the view of the back window slowed down to a crawl and abruptly stopped in front of us before rolling down the driver's side window. The driver was a blonde, middle-aged woman wearing large sunglasses that obscured much of her face. "Hey, it's not safe for you to walk out here," she called to us. My brother responded something along the lines of, "It's fine. We always walk home. We don't live far." She rolled her window back up and drove a few feet ahead before screeching to a halt, then rapidly reversed back to us while rolling down her window once more. She then yelled, "You little bastards! You spit on my car. You need to get in right now so I can drive you home to your parents so you can apologize in front of them." We both shook our heads, and I called back, "We didn't spit on your car. Look at the side. Get in my car right now so I can take you home." Without another word, we took off running to a nearby forest. My heart was pounding. I never turned back, but I did hear the door of the SUV opening and closing. We switched back and forth through the streets and woods, taking several different pathways before finally circling back around until we were home. We just sort of shrugged it off as, "Yeah, that was weird." Maybe 15 years later, when I told this story to a friend, their eyes grew wide. "You know she was trying to kidnap you, right?" Back in those days, I wasn't aware of things like human trafficking. If we had gotten into that SUV, we would have never been seen. Again. Between 8th to 10th grade, I was deeply involved in a small Minecraft building server. The average age of the players was probably 15 to 17 years old, and we Skyped almost every day for hours. We quickly grew close and would follow each other on other social media platforms. I became really close with one member in particular. His name was Peter. He was in the same grade as me, and I heard rumors that he might have had a crush on me. Rumors that he denied. I found the idea laughable, since we only knew each other online. We were in the same grade, but not in the same school, so I brushed it off, and things were okay for a while. But eventually, something felt off. During our conversations, I started catching him in small lies, which bothered me. Deciding it was time to distance myself, I stopped talking to him. A few months later, after no contact, Peter texted me out of the blue. He said that he might transfer to my high school to qualify for an in-state college tuition. His plan was to live alone and support himself while still in high school. My stomach dropped. This felt very wrong and out of nowhere. Still trying to stay calm, I told him that his plan was absolutely insane and pointed out how oddly convenient it was that he just happened to choose the school that I attended. But he insisted that this was a coincidence and that his plan would work. I really hoped that he was bluffing, just messing around. But a short time later, he claimed that he had already purchased plane tickets to visit my high school and stay in my town. Fear washed over me as I realized that Peter was serious and had an unhealthy attachment to me. He wasn't bluffing. To my horror, he posted a Snapchat photo from the airport. He asked me to meet up while he was in town, but I denied. Later on, his Snapchat account showed him touring my high school, taking videos and pictures, likely hoping that I would see them. Fortunately, I was home with pneumonia that day and didn't have to face him. Over the next few days, I was on edge, terrified that he would show up at my door. Luckily, he never figured out where I lived, and eventually he flew back home, abandoning his plan. Shockingly, the rest of our online group never thought his behavior was creepy. I felt like I was going crazy for finding it severely disturbing. I hoped my rejection of the meetup and continued silence would end things. But 2 years later, after I committed to my dream college, Peter popped up again. I had, foolishly, kept following him on social media to monitor if he was ever near me. Then I saw it, a photo of him posing in front of my college's library, captioned, "Transferring here is definitely the move." I don't know if he ever did, but I never ran into him on campus. A few months later, he found out that I had a boyfriend and contacted me on Skype for the first time in 2 years. "Do you think he's going to protect you?" Out of fear, I blocked him and unfollowed him on all social media. I admit that I made mistakes back then. I was young, scared, and surrounded by people telling me this wasn't a big deal. He hasn't tried to contact me since, but that doesn't mean he isn't still watching me. Over the weekend, I checked my Skype account for the first time in months. I had a contact request from the username Young Love Money. Curious, I added them to see more of their info. It didn't reveal much. Later that day, the account tried calling me. I didn't answer. I had zero desire to speak to someone I didn't know. Then the rogue account sent 5 messages. "Hey. How are you? You there? What's up? Hello?" Another call came through, then another, and another. The account kept changing its username as well. The calls came every 5 minutes or so. Soon, the messages turned angry and sexual. "What the fuck? How come you're not answering? I can't stop thinking about how I'm gonna fuck you. I want you to see what it looks like." There was more, but you get the idea. I blocked the user, but the calls and messages persisted from other accounts. I just ended up logging off my computer. My boyfriend was coming over that night, and I would deal with this later. Later on, my boyfriend and I went to my father's house to watch a football game with him and some other family members. He and my mother had split up some time ago. He now lives with my brother, his current wife, and her son. While I was there, I was now receiving nasty text messages on my phone. On the drive over, I had told my boyfriend what was going on with my Skype account, and I was now getting the same kind of messages on my phone. He suggested I call a number to see who picked up. I did. And here's where things get a bit fucked. My stepbrother's Skype started ringing. The mobile app has a distinct tone, so I knew right then and there he had been the culprit all along. He scrambled for his phone and stopped the call just as mine hung up. He then bolted upstairs and didn't come back down for the rest of the night. My stepbrother is a 29-year-old, 6'4", 260-pound, jobless man-child. He would always make me feel uncomfortable with his temper, space-invading habits, and inappropriate jokes at odd times. Now I was extremely nervous. I didn't want to tell my dad though, for fear of putting his marriage under strain. Plus, I kinda knew his mom would side with her son anyway, and act like he had done nothing wrong. She's part of the reason he behaves this way. My real brother, who also lives there, has had some issues with him as well. But nothing ever gets done about it. My stepmother just laughs and says, "Oh, he's just giving you a hard time." Of course, my father is next to useless when it comes to this situation, which is super painful because my brother and I genuinely care about him a lot. My stepmother claims that her son has emotional issues and can't work because of his condition. I guess we're going to have to add only child syndrome to the DSM-5. Imagine being married to a woman who has a 29-year-old son who throws temper tantrums until he gets his way, and she always brushes it off like it's nothing. Now, hold on to your pants, because we're not done yet. Not by a long shot. There's more to this jigsaw puzzle. And if you're thinking that this is a story about my creepy stepbrother, you're only half right. The true horror of this story is my father's absolute failures, plural, when it comes to his relationships. My dad bends over backwards to avoid upsetting his wife, even at the expense of his own children. We had major issues with his last wife, the one he married after divorcing my mom. She turned out to be an attractive drug addict and a cheater. There was a time where he stopped seeing me because his wife was jealous of me. If she didn't want him to go somewhere, he would just stay home, and he would be upset with my brother and I if we complained about it in any way, accusing us of trying to wreck his new marriage. Once she was involved in a hit and run and claimed that I had borrowed her car and I was the one who did it. My father backed her up, telling me to stop lying and confess, but the police were able to prove that it was in fact her behind the wheel, not me. So yeah, my father is a bit of a fucking moron, and it took quite some time for our relationship to mend after that. My dad is fine with his current wife's son living there, because he's been sold on this condition from the start. Here is another fun fact. My father and my current stepmom were high school sweethearts once upon a time, and they were actually married before my dad met my mom when they were in their early 20s. Things didn't work out, and they ended up divorcing. 30 years later, they run into each other at a gas station and began dating again. They eventually remarried this past August. I actually get along with her quite well, and she is very good to my father. She just has a messed up son who's going to ruin everything. It's sad, but it is what it is. I'm not too worried for myself. I'm never alone with him, and I think this was a twisted game for my stepbrother's amusement. Like, haha, you don't know it's me. That was the initial plan anyway, until I caught him red-handed. I feel like he was using his Skype account to anonymously confess those things to me, and now I know he has had those thoughts. But I haven't heard from him since. Now whenever I visit my dad, he stays upstairs, never coming down. The holidays are going to be very awkward for us though. I don't want to exchange gifts or even be near my stepbrother at all. I've always found him creepy, but this was a whole new level of insanity. This is a story about learning things the hard way. You can roll your eyes and point out all the bad decisions I made, and you would be right. But I would argue that good decisions can only be made with the knowledge of bad experiences. Let me start from the beginning. I'm a female, and I once had a friend who I thought of as a brother, someone I could talk to and trust with my deepest secrets. I met him at school during a sports day in my 4th year of secondary school. We'll call him Joshua. It was the last day before the holidays. We hung out with a group of others. We were laughing and enjoying ourselves. Afterward, we exchanged Facebook info. He didn't message me until midway through the holiday break, just saying hi and checking in. I was quite a bit of a loner back then, and I hadn't had a real friend since primary school, so I was flattered. We started talking on a regular basis. Around this time, I was moving houses, and he mentioned that he only lived 10 to 15 minutes away, meaning that we could hang out sometimes. I was excited. I had never had a friend over before, so it felt like a new experience. A year later, we were best friends. We discovered our mutual interests, walked around town, went to movies, swam, shared secrets. We did everything. But this is where things take a turn for the worse. He wanted this to be something more, but I just didn't have those feelings for Josh. In fact, I had a boyfriend named Charlie, and Josh was aware of this. He insisted that Charlie didn't treat me right, that I wasn't meant to be with him, or was talking behind my back. When I asked for proof of this, he would go silent and not say anything. Hindsight is always 20/20, and looking back, I'm a bit embarrassed of the position that I put myself in. I admit that I friend-zoned Josh hard, and it was causing problems. But at the time, I didn't seem to care that much, and in fact, I found him to be annoying. He kept trying to join Skype calls I would have with Charlie, who I rarely got to speak to between his job and my studies. We usually declined Josh joining, and he would get upset, messaging me, "If you were really my friend, you would let me join," only to apologize 30 minutes later for being childish. All of my online friends, including Josh, knew that I was a big-time gamer. I recently started playing a new game that I didn't want to tell Josh about. Because of what was going on at the time, I didn't want him following me, even in cyberspace. He had done this twice before, always nagging me to play together. I found a great guild, raiding twice a week for a few hours, and things are going great. A week later, Josh found out through a mutual friend, signed up, and joined my guild. I knew it was him. He always used the same username. Apparently, he was trash-talking me behind my back, harassing female members, and just generally annoying everyone. He thought everything he said was hilarious. Every other sentence was a bad reference. He would disrupt our raids by joining our voice channel and blasting loud music. He was eventually booted. Frankly, he got what he deserved. After he had been bad-mouthing me behind my back and deciding enough was enough, I called him on Skype and ended our friendship. He didn't take it well. He cursed me out, threatened to leak all my secrets to my friends, and said that he would ruin my life. I hung up, blocked him, and thanked God that he was gone. Or so I thought. I had forgotten that he knew where I lived. I've been avoiding him for a month, prioritizing time with my guild, and just not wanting to deal with him. 3 weeks after cutting him off, I noticed something disturbing. I'm a diagnosed insomniac, and sometimes I gaze at the street lamps outside. That's when I saw Josh standing under the street lamp closest to my house. My room has a balcony outside the window. It's easy to climb, with its ledges and pipes. I've even snuck down that way before. I usually kept my window open because my room is so warm at night. At the time, I didn't have a fan, and the AC unit was broken, but that week had been freezing, so the window was closed. 15 minutes later, I saw him approaching my house and started climbing. I was so grateful that I had closed the window that night. It would have been easy to slip through otherwise. I turned off my monitor and sat there in the dark, shaking, with my teeth chattering, but still trying my best to stay quiet. I couldn't leave my room. The creak of the floorboards would have gave me away, and he could easily hear me from the balcony. I could not scream for help either. My mom was out drinking, and my younger sister was at my grandparents' house. I was alone, and watched in terror as he approached the window. He tried opening the window, but it wouldn't budge from the outside. So he just sat there, staring into my bedroom. It became a waiting game. Minutes felt like hours. I had this awful feeling that if I made any noise, he would leap up and smash his way through. Around 5 a.m., my mom's car pulled into the driveway. Relief washed over me. She actually saw Josh and began yelling at him. I heard him scrambling back down the pipes. She initially thought that I had invited him over, but when I explained to her what was going on, she hugged me and said that she was glad I was okay. We called the police, but they said they couldn't do anything since he hadn't assaulted me. It's been a year and a half now. I haven't seen or heard from Joshua since. He just simply vanished. Maybe that's for the best. Wherever you are, Joshua, I hope you got some help and moved on, because you came extremely close to going down a very dark path. This took place 2 summers ago in my hometown of Dallas. I am aware of the human trafficking that happens in this city. I had a coworker pulled out of work and placed into a safe house by the FBI because she finally decided to rat out her family, who were part of a human trafficking operation. However, I never thought they would just randomly snatch people off the street. All the stories I've heard involve drugs or coercion. One day I was cycling to a smoke shop. It's kind of out of my way and not located in a great neighborhood, but I was fairly confident. It was daylight. I ride all over the city, and I know the store. I was 24 at the time, and I had short pink hair, but I always considered myself to be a bit too intimidating to be a target for kidnapping. I guess I was overdue for a reality check. I sometimes forget that even though I have a military background, I'm still a short Caucasian female. I pull up to a crosswalk, and I'm waiting for the light to turn green when 2 Hispanic males start catcalling me from a white van. There were no identifying markings, no stickers. It was your stereotypical free candy van. The way they called to me was a bit off. It wasn't your typical, "Hey, nice tits, let me fuck you," locker room bullshit. They would talk to each other, and then yell through a cracked window about how they were going to get me and that I was next. They seemed a bit too excited, but I just flipped them off and the van drove away. End of story, right? Wrong. Up ahead, just after the empty lot, was a brick wall that preceded an alleyway. Not the kind that you can use as a shortcut either. It was enclosed. My guess is this was where the dumpsters used to be. Suddenly the van speeds up and pulls in front of me, blocking my way. They were trying to get me to turn into the alley, which would have been a dead end. This all happened in the span of 7 seconds. Honestly, I didn't panic. I didn't actively register any fear. It was like someone much calmer took over my body. I remember quickly turning and crossing the street without even thinking about it. As I was pedaling up the other side of the road, I realized this was the van from before, and now it had a window repair magnet on the side. It was way too small to look legit, and had absolutely no contact info on it. Just a generic company name. I kept rubbernecking and saw that there was no one sitting in the front, but there was movement behind the seats in the back. The men were now in the back of the van, by the rear doors. They had literally planned to drag me off my bike, in broad daylight, right there on the street, and into the back of the van, to do God knows what to me. Once I passed, they scrambled back into the front seat and peeled out so hard they burnt rubber. I got to the store safely, but I still hate myself for not taking down the plate number. Not that it would have done any good. They likely switched it out later. I knew that I had almost been abducted, but it wasn't until I told this story to someone from Mexico that I considered the possibility it was human traffickers. They said that it sounded sadly familiar and that this happens all the time. As I mentioned earlier, I had known a little bit about it before this incident, but I never thought they snatched people up in broad daylight, right off the streets. I have no family, and I'm not very close with my roommates. I would have been across the border, or dead, before anyone even would know I was gone. In 2010, I was driving from New Orleans, Louisiana to Eugene, Oregon. It was just me, a 24-year-old female, and my 2-year-old pit bull. We were in a 14-foot U-Haul truck, with everything I owned crammed into the back. I had one of those fancy flip phones and a MapQuest printout. I think the first smartphones actually came out around this time, but I didn't have one. Cell phone service was also much spottier, and there were long stretches through the desert where I had zero service for hundreds of miles. I was driving on a lonely stretch of highway through central Texas when I realized I hadn't seen a town or exit for a very long time, and my giant U-Haul was running low on gas. Just when I'm about to freak out, I see a small town coming up. When I arrived, I was so worried about other things that I never really paid attention to the name of the town, but there were only about 6 streets in the whole place, so I go gas up and was ready to get back on the road. Except I could not for the life of me find a way back to the highway. I circled the town about 4 times, and I began getting so frustrated because this was such a small town. How the hell could I not find my way out? I could literally see the highway, but couldn't get to it. I returned to the gas station and asked for directions. Now, when I got gas, I paid at the pump and never went in. When I entered, there was a skinny, nondescript guy who had black hair hanging down in front of his eyes. It looked like he could use a shower. He was not particularly creepy, just a bit rude. Our eyes never met. He was looking down at a magazine. He gives me directions that don't sound correct at all. He gave me the name of a road that would get me back to the highway in about 17 miles. For a moment, I was dumbfounded. I then point out that I didn't drive that far to get from the highway into town. Why so far to get back to the highway? You can literally see it from the town. He gives me some explanation about the road curving around. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. He was so casual, almost like I was just an annoyance, and can follow his directions or not. He still doesn't look at me. He then waved his hand in the direction of the door. When I get back into the parking lot, my whole body begins trembling violently, and my heart started racing, seemingly for no reason. Once I got back into the truck and put the key in the ignition, I burst into tears. I had the most terrible feeling that, no matter how nonchalant he acted, the gas station attendant had bad intentions. I didn't know what exactly, but I knew right then and there was no way in hell I was going to follow his directions. Yet, this was the only store in this small town, and short of knocking on doors, no thanks, there was no one else to ask. I decided that I didn't give a shit if this town had dropped out of the twilight zone. I was going to drive around until I found my way out, even if it took me all damn night. Then a big red beater of a pickup truck, as much rust as metal, pulls up and produces the quintessential Texas man. Huge, husky, wearing flannel and work boots. Without even thinking about it, I jump out of my U-Haul and approached him quickly, yet wearily. Looking into his eyes, I could see a kind human being, or at least I was hoping so. I asked him if he could please give me directions back to the highway. I told him I knew it was silly, but I just couldn't seem to find my way back. He looked concerned as I was visibly upset, so he made me laugh and very cheerfully gave me directions for a hairpin curve turnoff right at the end of a small concrete tunnel that I had passed several times. He said it often confuses travelers because it was so hard to see in the dark. They need to put up signs, etc. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I asked him how far in miles it was back to the highway. He laughed and gave me a funny look. "Miles, miss? I'd say it's a quarter mile at most. You can see the highway right from here." At this point, I couldn't help it. I had to know. "So what happens if I drive?" I gave him the directions that the man in the store had given me. The Texan looked at me very intently and asked me how I knew about that route. It was pretty far out, and usually only locals knew about it. So I told him. He was quiet for a few minutes, and then asked me what the gas station attendant looked like, and if I had a map of the state. I gave him a physical description of the clerk, and said that I didn't have a map, just my MapQuest printout, which was not helpful in this situation. He goes to his truck and grabs a raggedy local map from his glove box, spreads it out for me, and traces the route that I described. The directions that I had been given led away from town, away from the interstate, and seemingly to the middle of nowhere. The Texan told me that the road did go for about 17 miles, right before it dead-ended in the desert. I asked him what was out there. He told me that there was really nothing, just some junked cars and a few trailers and mobile homes, all owned by the same family. This family was known locally as troublemakers, meth heads, and alcoholics. These were the nice things the townspeople had to say about them. The clerk in the gas station was part of this family and lived down that road. I'll never forget the look in the Texan's eyes as he told me this. He also told me that I was smart to listen to my instincts and said to be careful traveling out there. I don't know if the man in the gas station wanted to see what was in the back of my U-Haul, but thankfully, I didn't have to find out. I also learned that guardian angels can sometimes look like ruddy-haired Texans with scruffy faces driving rusty pickup trucks. Big thanks to that random Texan. You really saved my ass, and I'll always be grateful for that. I'm sorry that I never asked for your name, but you'll always be Texas to me. My grandparents owned some property way out in the boonies of East Texas. I grew up going out there all the time for family get-togethers and whatnot. Now, since it was only a 45-minute drive away from where I lived, I would go out there with friends to camp, party, whatever. It was February of 2014. I knew that I was going to be writing a press release for work all weekend. I thought, why not spend some time in the great outdoors instead of being cooped up in my apartment in Houston? I had never stayed out there by myself, but I had always been keen on the idea and thought this would be an excellent time to do just that. I called up my grandfather, asking if it would be okay for me to use the place for the weekend, and he said of course. He did seem a bit hesitant about me doing it alone, but I was a 24-year-old guy who had grown up hiking, and I felt totally confident that I could handle anything that might happen. Honestly, at the time I was a bit insulted when he seemed to think that me going out there by myself was not the best idea. He made sure I knew how to turn on the electricity and water, which of course I did. I've only done it a million times before whenever I brought friends out there. He asked if I had a key, which again, I did. Finally he said, "You know where I keep the Henry, right? My granddad is kind of a cowboy and keeps a 30-30 Henry repeater out there, mainly for shooting whitetail, but you never know." "Yeah, I know where it is." Admittedly, for the first time, I was nervous. To my knowledge, he was the only one who had ever stayed out there by himself, and he had never really talked to me about his guns. The only shooting I had ever done was with a pellet gun as a kid, and then a camera as I got older. The drive out there was nice after I got out of the city. I left work at 4:30 already packed and drove straight there. With the Houston traffic, I made it out there by 6:45. Still light, but the sun was beginning to set. I took my duffel bag out of the trunk and went inside. This house is more like a small resort than it is a ranch. It's very nice, which is why I enjoy taking people out there so much. My granddad is pretty well off and had the place built when he was retired. It has 12 bedrooms, and I chose to stay in the upstairs master bedroom. I unpacked, sat on the bed, and opened up my laptop to look at what I had to write, and I immediately closed it. Fuck that. I'll work on it tomorrow. For now, I just want to go for a walk. There's a trail that goes in a big circle around the perimeter of the property and is about 3.5 miles. It was dark out by now, and the thought briefly crossed my mind to bring along the rifle, but I decided on a sturdy 5-foot wooden dowel instead, so if I slipped in the dark I wouldn't shoot off my foot or something. I threw on a jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out. It was a clear, moonless night, and the swath of the Milky Way across the sky was impressive, but it was still really dark out. I didn't use my flashlight so my eyes would adjust, and after 10 minutes or so, I could see reasonably well. It was nice outside. Chilly, but nice. After about 1.5 miles, I decided to cut the route short, through the woods, and head back. I know the land so well that I could head back to the house from any point on the property. The woods and brush are pretty dense though, and I am forced to turn on my flashlight. A thick wall of twigs and vines was revealed. I pushed through it with my stick, getting a couple scratches in the process, when I see something deeper in the forest, partially obscured by the underbrush. It looked like someone had left a pile of clothes in the woods. I kept the light trained on it for a second or two, trying to see what it was. Suddenly, it jumps up, fast, and sprints further into the trees. My heart jumps to my throat, and my stomach does a somersault. I feel pins and needles of adrenaline surge all over. With all the force I can muster, I try to shout, "Who's there?" But I have no idea what it actually sounded like. Immediately, I regretted not bringing along that rifle. But hell, I had even left my cell phone on the bed. Fucking brilliant. The worst part of it was, whoever it was had taken off in the direction of the house, and I couldn't remember if I locked the door behind me. After the initial shock began to wear off, real fear set in. It is suddenly very cold. Never before have I felt so isolated, and so fucking stupid. I should have never come out here by myself. If that guy shoots me or something, no one will miss me until Monday. After collecting myself, I concluded that I had to get to my phone. I walk 1 mile through the forest, terrified the entire way. The woods end about 150 yards from the house's front patio, and I basically had to sprint. Now, for any of you who have been in a situation like this, know that running does not help. You can feel that gut-wrenching panic making you constantly think something is right on your heels. When I got to the front door in this semi-sane state, I was in for another shock, since the door is cracked open, and I can't remember if I did that or not. I have to go inside. I push open the door, holding the dowel sort of like a baseball bat, and immediately hear shrieking coming from the living room. I don't think I have ever been as close to blind terror as I was in that moment. I would not have been able to speak. I could only manage a struggled, "Gah!" I sprint up the stairs and into the room where my stuff is, at every turn expecting to see some horrific rotted corpse shrieking at me. I slam the door behind me, and I hear the scream again, from directly below me this time. I run into the bathroom and dial 911, locking the door and hiding in the shower. In retrospect, this seems like a real bitch move, but every ounce of bravado had long since drained out of me. I tried to describe what was happening over the phone, but I'm not sure how much sense it made. There is a small town about 9 miles away from our property, where the nearest police station was. It took them 20 minutes to arrive, during which I heard the scream one more time. It was a lower pitch now, and sounded strangled. Then came the flashing red and blue lights through the window. I was still hiding in the shower when I heard a man shout, "Police! Anyone here? Come on out." I got up and opened the bathroom door, then heard a voice downstairs. "Christ. Evans, call an ambulance." I then opened the bedroom door, and a cop down the hall has a gun on me. "Freeze!" I try explaining that this was my family's place, and that I was the one that called, but they still handcuffed me. I soon see why. In the living room was the man I saw in the forest, on his back, staring blankly upward, one arm outstretched at the ceiling, and the other bent, but still reaching upward. His head was lying in a pool of blood. We eventually get it cleared up who was who, and that I wasn't the one that cracked this guy's skull open. Later I found out this man was a paranoid schizophrenic, possibly homeless, who had wandered onto our property, hard to tell where from. We still don't know how he was bleeding, some kind of blunt force trauma. Maybe he fell. But I'm pretty sure if it was my granddad instead of me out there, he would have been shot. Despite what happened, I still got the press release completed by that Monday. This happened to me in August of 2008. It was a bright, sunny morning in Window, North Carolina, around 11 a.m. I sometimes get into these moods where I don't want to be around other people for a while. This was one of those days. So I packed my travel bag with water, cigarettes, a novel, and several notebooks, and set off to an isolated area where I could relax. North Carolina provides plenty of places to sit down and enjoy the outdoors in relative comfort for several hours. I was walking down a road between the public library and a nursing home when I noticed a car trailing behind me. It was a large, filthy sedan. It looked like it was once white. Honestly, it looked like it had been resurrected from a junkyard or something. It had a loud, noisy engine. The occupants catcalled me as they passed. This kind of thing has been happening to me since I was 10 years old, so I did what I always do. Ignored them, and made a sharp left turn into the parking lot of an apartment complex I had to pass through. From previous explorations, I knew the parking lot ended in a drop-off to a wooded gully with a creek lined with flat rocks. It was a fantastic place to cool off and hang out in the summer. In retrospect, that gully was also an ideal place to dispose of a dead body, but that didn't occur to me until well after what happened next. I was equally annoyed and nervous when I realized the car was following me. There's something about noisy engines idling behind me that crawls under my skin. It signifies that someone is there, watching. After pulling ahead of me, the car slowed down, creeping forward, while the men inside continued to call out. I had never dealt with this level of harassment before. It was a step beyond the usual nonsense I've encountered. That's why I turned into the parking lot earlier than I normally would. I wanted to be off the road as quickly as possible. When the driver realized that I had dropped out of sight, he slowed the car until it stopped in the middle of the road. Then, I heard the unmistakable sound of the car going into reverse. They were actually backing up to pursue me into the parking lot. At this point, I became terrified. I've had many nightmares about being chased, so this was literally a dream come true, just not a good one. While I've had many creepy and aggressive experiences with men before, being chased down in a car was a first. I didn't want to show weakness by breaking into a run, so I lengthened my stride, heading for the end of the parking lot as quickly as possible. I assumed that once I reached a place that they couldn't follow, they would give up. I heard them about 20 feet behind me as I descended into the gully. I nearly broke my neck in the process, but I was in a hurry. I managed to reach the big flat rocks at the bottom. I sighed and thought, well, that's the last of them. Until I heard the car pull up to the edge of the pavement, right where I had climbed over. I didn't run away immediately. I was too angry, too stubborn, wanting to believe that this was all a misunderstanding. It seemed too incredible that anyone would deliberately stalk me to this degree at 11 a.m. on a Sunday in a boring part of town. I stood on the flat rock, listening and looking up at the sedan. It was tense, but I didn't expect it to escalate any further. I could still hear the engine rattling. Perhaps one of them needed to grab something from a friend in the apartment complex. I thought I would hear them drive away any second. But then I heard the car door open, followed by the voices of at least 2 men. I couldn't make out much of what they were saying, but I heard the word fuck a lot. I don't think they could see me clearly from where they were, but I wasn't sticking around either way. The gully is heavily wooded, which is ideal for not only shade, but also, as it turned out, for hiding from dirty rednecks and big cars who don't know when to give up. I found a vantage point that hid me entirely from view and allowed me to see the sedan. I was also close enough to a nearby house that I could run for help if needed. Did I mention that I left my cell phone at home with my mom because hers wasn't working? Yeah, that's what I call bad timing. I'm sure I wasn't hiding among the trees for more than a minute. It felt longer. That's how panic works for me. My mind loses its grip on reality. Unfortunately for my blood pressure, the moment the car pulled away from the edge of the parking lot and disappeared from view, I realized that if Captain Poontang and his redneck minions were to circle the block in their shitty sedan, they could probably spot me from the road. So I ran out of the trees and back to the rocks lining the ravine, which would hide me from anyone not standing at the edge and looking straight down. I spent the next 2.5 hours sitting there, chain smoking, waiting for my nerves to settle. I would have left sooner. I was starving and running low on water, but a man was mowing grass at the apartment complex above me. After what happened, I was so freaked out that I was afraid he would say something creepy if I walked past him. There is a popular urban legend dating back to at least the early 1980s about a frightened girl who was home alone one night. She had a habit of putting her hand over the side of her bed so her dog would lick it to calm her down. There are many variations of this story, but it always ends with the dog being killed and her discovering the horrifying truth that it was not her dog licking her hand. Of course, this is just an urban legend. But what if I told you that I have a true story that comes pretty close? Don't worry, no dead dogs. I know people don't like that. This is a story of a girl named Daphne who attended my high school. I don't want to reveal too much information about her, as I'm not sure if this was ever in the newspapers or not. But it occurred about 3 years ago in Charlotte, North Carolina. Our story begins as Daphne was going to bed one night during a Charlotte winter, which can get unpleasantly cold. Daphne remembered feeling restless during her sleep and groggily waking up to pull the covers back over her, which had been displaced several times throughout the night. At one point, she woke up shivering as her blanket had, once again, maneuvered its way to her waist. Without moving or opening her eyes, Daphne lay there in silence, wondering why she kept kicking her blanket off in her sleep. This had never happened to her before. That's when she felt her blanket being slowly pulled toward the foot of her bed. Imagine how terrifying that must have been, suddenly realizing you're not alone. Daphne opened her eyes to see a man at the foot of her bed, staring back at her. Immediately, she jumped up, screaming, and ran out of her room to get her parents. The intruder escaped through the window and was never caught. The police were called and found several beer cans and a knife under her bed, giving them reason to believe that the man had frequently watched her at night. How he got inside the house is still a mystery. Nobody knows if the man was planning to do something horrible to her or merely liked watching her sleep. I want to preface this story by saying that I'm used to harassment and creepy encounters. I'm a 5'2", young, blonde female living in a suburb of Chicago. I've had my fair share of weird guys saying things to me and having the feeling like I was in danger. But this experience has been haunting me for a while. I go to college at the University of Illinois, and I walk to all of my classes since it was good exercise. And the furthest one from my dorm is only a 20-minute walk away. I take the same route to my 11 a.m. lecture every Friday. About 2 weeks ago, I was walking to my class, and I had one earbud in. I was minding my own business when I noticed a slightly beat-up pickup truck driving alongside me. This by itself wasn't that alarming. There's a lot of construction happening on campus right now, and the truck itself had this generic symbol for a masonry company on the side. Here's where it gets a bit unnerving. The truck slowed down to match my pace. I attributed this to the driver of the truck wanting to pull into the parking lot entrance just up ahead, so I stayed back to allow him to go in, but he suddenly stopped as well. I look at the driver of the truck, and it was obvious that he was trying to make it look like he wasn't staring at me. He had a paper map unfolded in front of him, but I saw his eyes looking at me through the rearview mirror. He was an older man, maybe about 60, and Caucasian. I started walking again, passing the parking lot, and the truck began moving again, still matching my pace. I decided to speed up a little bit, and he sped up as well. This is where I started to internally freak out. It's broad daylight. There are people around, but nobody is seeing this creepy man following me in his pickup truck. I began to weigh my options. There are other students around, so he might be waiting until I was alone. But if he tried something, there's a chance I could fend him off, since I've taken self-defense classes before. Or I could go inside the nearest building, risk missing my lecture, and just wait for him to go away. Thankfully, a bus pulled up behind him and honked multiple times. The bus driver was probably aggravated that this truck was going 5 miles per hour on a road that was 30. The driver seemed reluctant, but he eventually had to drive away. I returned to my dorm room after class and began researching. I looked up every masonry company in the area, scrolling through websites and Yelp reviews for hours on end. And I didn't find a single one with that same logo I saw on the side of that truck. I told my roommate what happened when she got back, and she thought I should report it to the campus police. I agreed with her and called it in. After being put on hold several times, they listened to my story and immediately transferred me to the actual police department. They sent out an officer to my dorm, and I recounted the story to him in person. The officer looked very concerned, and he agreed that I was definitely being followed. He asked me if I knew the license plate number, and I mentally kicked myself because I had been so freaked out that I didn't even think to take a picture of it or commit it to memory. I gave a description of the truck and the driver, and offered to draw up the logo since I'm an art student. The officer said that they would be increasing patrols in the area, and they would keep an eye out for any vehicles matching the description I gave. I may have gotten lucky that day, but that doesn't mean the next target will be. When I was 15, my parents and I were in Chicago visiting family. We had some time to kill while waiting for a train to head back home, so we decided to visit Grant Park, which was just a short walk away from the transportation center. We had been exploring the city all day, and the park seemed like the perfect spot to relax. Honestly, none of us were too keen on standing around a bustling station, with people constantly going in and out. Around the time we had to head back, I lingered about 30 feet from my parents, staring at a mural of Martin Luther King Jr. painted on a brick building across the way. I was admiring the attention to detail. Suddenly, my dad called out, "Hey, hurry up." Being a stubborn teenager, I wanted to dig through my travel bag and take a photo of the mural with my Polaroid. It's a hobby of mine. When I protested, my father repeated himself, and something in his tone told me that he was worried. I sensed that something was off. My dad had grown up in Oak Park, not far from Chicago. As a kid, he spent time with his grandmother on the south side, while his father worked a construction job in the city during the 60s and 70s. He knew how bad things could get. As I approached him, he spoke to me in a low tone. "There's a man watching you." I brushed off what he said at first. There was someone watching me? No big deal. But then, I turned around and saw him. There was a man, wearing a tan bomber jacket and a bright red pair of Converse sneakers. I remembered seeing those shoes from a TV show I watched, which is why that detail stuck with me. He was holding a cell phone and staring directly at us without blinking. His gaze was predatory, like he had spotted a huge crate of gold and was calling up some buddies to help him move it. The intensity of his stare was unnerving. Grabbing my arm, my dad said, "Come on, we're heading back to the station." We crossed the street, and the man followed, his eyes locked on me the whole way. At the next intersection, he crossed the street again to stay parallel with us. "Who is he? Why does he keep staring at me, Dad?" I stammered. We started weaving through streets, taking random turns, but every time we thought we had lost him, there he was, steadily closing the distance, his gaze unwavering. My heart pounded. My mom didn't seem as alarmed as my dad and I were, but didn't complain about anything. Desperate, we ran to the Macy's on State Street. Once we were inside, we finally felt safe. There were no signs of the bomber jacket assailant, but this encounter has left a lasting mark on me. I wonder what might have happened if he had caught up to us, or if I had been alone that day. I'm sure there was a reason that he was targeting me, but I'm not sure I really want to know. This happened about a year ago, when I was 26. I'm a female and tend to be friendly toward most people. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a small woman. I'm 5'7" and slightly overweight, but I still get quite a lot of attention, for some reason. This particular day, I was heading home from work. I had a job in a warehouse at the time, and I was wearing old yoga pants and a bleach-stained shirt. I had no makeup on. My hair was up, and it was summertime in South Carolina. It was hot. I basically looked as unattractive as I possibly could. I just moved into a new apartment, and I was going to build myself some shelves out of wood and cinder blocks. I decided to swing by Lowe's after work to grab some materials I needed. I got one of those large pallet carts and started collecting the things I would require. I take pride in the fact that I'm pretty strong, and being able to build things, lift things, and generally just doing shit on my own. As I'm loading cinder blocks on my cart, This Lowe's employee walks up to me. I smile at him politely. He was maybe 5'11", wearing wire frame glasses, sparse stash, yellowing teeth, balding, but somehow was still physically fit. He was maybe in his 40s, although I admit I'm a bad judge of age. He offers to help me. No thank you, I've got this. Oh no, this is what they paid me for. He literally takes the cart from me and starts pushing it and begins asking me all these questions. They seem pretty standard at first. What was I building? The materials I needed? Things like that. I answer him but keep them short. I was definitely getting the vibe that he was trying to hit on me. He then starts telling me about how he's a former Marine in his time in the service, and how he stays fit and in shape, and then begins bragging about how strong he is. And I kid you not, he flexes for me. Like, who did this guy think he was? Johnny Bravo? At this point, I'm getting annoyed, but not creeped out. We get to the lumber section, and I begin to grab this board. No, I can get that for you. Nah, it's fine. I can do this on my own. He gives me another toothy grin. Nuh-uh. Okay, whatever. Maybe he needs to feel useful or something. So I let him grab it. He walks behind me, and as he does, I hear in my ear, like someone looking at something tasty. Immediately I'm like, fuck. Is this gonna be one of those situations where I have to awkwardly decline someone's advances? Hoping it wouldn't come to that, I just ignore it. I had to get a couple more things and he insists on getting them for me. Every time walking behind me and making those sounds right in my ear. Fuck the rest of the stuff. I just want to get out of here. I tell him that I'm going to the checkout line, and he reminds me of the other stuff I mentioned and that he could help me with it. No, I need to be going home now. I'm definitely not being friendly, and I'm not smiling anymore. I go to push the cart again, and his creepy sing-along voice, he insists on doing it for me. We get to the checkout, and at this point, I've texted my best friend and told her about this weirdo following me around in Lowe's. I also tell her his name, which I can't remember at this moment. I said if anything happened to me, that he was the one who did it. I was only half joking. He was really creeping me out at this point. I'm at the register and one of the boards didn't have a tag on it. Mr. Creepy says he will go grab another, and he walks behind me again and whispers, "Delicious," in my ear, and I get the chills. He comes back with a new board and walks behind me again, manages to brush against my hip, even though we have plenty of room. Then he whispered, "Eat you up. I finally check out, and this creep is still hanging around. He offers to help me out to my car. I firmly say no. Well, I need to come take the cart back when you're done. It'll be easier. I am not letting him follow me to my car in this huge parking lot, but he persisted that he had to bring the cart back with him. So I say I'll just bring my car to the front and load it up. He finally relents and walks back inside. Thank God. I get in my car and pull around to the front. He emerges from the store. Let me load that for you." I had a board in my arms, and he grabs it from me. With his terrible smile, he says in the creepiest way possible, "Oh no, Gabrielle. I got this. I can get it in there, like swimwear." How the fuck did he know my name? He looks at me like I'm prey. I'm so freaked out at this point, and I am feeling very unsafe, even though we're in front of the store, and there are plenty of people about. He finishes loading my car, and I don't even acknowledge or thank him. He scoots around, opens my car door for me, and gives me another toothy grin. I completely ignore him, but I have to pass right next to him to get into my car. Right in my ear, I hear him whisper, delicious. I give him the most disgusted look I could muster. This doesn't deter him. He licks his lips and winks at me again. I get in my car and lock the doors. As I put my car in drive, he taps on my window and waves. I heard him saying to drive safe back to my apartment, which he knows by name. It was nice getting to know you, Gabrielle. I got the fuck out of there. I have never seen that man before in my life, and I have no idea how he knows my name or where I lived. I have never gone back to that Lowe's again. Every time I think about that incident, I kick myself for not reporting him. I hesitate to use the word stalked due to the infrequency of when things happened, but I really don't have another word for what's been going on for so long. I'm a 28-year-old female from South Carolina. This man, my mother's ex-boyfriend, has been an unwelcomed intrusion into our lives for 30 years, and frankly, I have a feeling that it's not going to end anytime soon. Short of taking measures that are too extreme to even consider, my family and I don't seem to have any choice other than to put up with it. We can't ignore it, because just when we think it's over, he comes back. He always comes back. We run into him in town, someone mentions his name, or an event will trigger a memory, and we're right back in that hopeless, frustrating feeling of being powerless. I can't recount every single step that's brought my family to this point. This would just go on for too long. But I can relay major events that have happened, even without every detail. This is going to be pretty long, so strap in. I guess I should start at the beginning. To make a long story short, my mom met this guy in high school. His name was Rick. Rick and my mom dated for 4 years, starting at the end of their senior year. He was the son of a local politician, very good-looking and athletic. I have spoken to her at length about her time with him, and she told me that while they were initially together, there was nothing that she saw that would indicate anything was off about him. But slowly, over the course of their relationship, he changed. He started telling her what she could and could not wear, who she could talk to. He told her that she couldn't smoke anymore, that she had to get a new car because he couldn't be seen with her in the old truck she drove, that she had to move out of her parents' house and marry him as soon as possible. He was also pushing hard for her to sleep with him. She didn't, and she has never been able to say, at least to me, why that was, other than having this gut feeling that she shouldn't. For the most part, my mom ignored the way he was trying to control her life. She did nothing he wanted her to do. She's stubborn and very no-nonsense, so it floors me that she put up with his bullshit for so long. I guess she felt that she couldn't do any better, and thought that, given time, she could change him. But Rick didn't change, at least not for the better. If anything, he got worse. He became verbally abusive and put her down every chance he got. Eventually, she broke up with him. She had found out that he was sleeping with a friend of hers, among several other women. Over the course of the year they were no longer together, Rick was constantly trying to get back with her. He would call her at work and at home. He would drive by to where she was working her second job, or would follow her whenever she drove somewhere that wasn't work or home. He tried to get her friends to tell him where she was or give her messages from him. He even had his mother stop her in the grocery store and plead with her to take him back. She told my mom that even though she was from, quote, lower class trash, her son was devastated without my mom in his life. While this was happening, my mom met my father, and when Rick found out about it, he seemed to back off a bit. My dad's a big guy and comes from a rough family that had a reputation for fighting. I guess that made him hesitant to continue his stalking behavior, at least for a while. That all changed when my parents got married. My mom would pick up the phone when it rang to hear heavy breathing on the line. A man's voice that was clearly disguised would try to ask her questions about her marriage, or say something lewd about her or the intimate aspect of my parents' relationship. I say try because as soon as she heard the voice, she would hang up, although she wasn't always quick enough. Back then, there were no stalker laws in South Carolina, and since there wasn't any kind of physical assault, there wasn't much that the police could do. Not that they would have anyway. This all took place in a small town, population of hardly more than about 5,000, and the sheriff was real good friends with Rick's father. Suffice to say, the legal avenue was closed off to my family. My grandmothers, tired of the harassment of their children, got together at one point and cornered Rick's mom in town one afternoon. They told her point blank that if she didn't put a stop to her son's behavior, they were going to make sure the newspapers found out about the other recreational activities he had been up to, which, as you can probably guess, weren't legal. Again, the calls stopped. When my sister and I were born, all hell broke loose. Rumors started flying around that Rick was actually our father, and that my mother had been having an affair with him. Pictures of my mom with us at the store, or somewhere in town, would turn up in the mailbox, along with letters stating how much we looked like Rick. What was most disturbing is that these letters would also mention how attractive my sister and I were going to be when we grew up. When my mom showed that particular letter to my dad, he was furious. That night, he drove out to the dive bar where Rick and his friends were known to hang out. Rick wasn't there, but 3 of his buddies were. My dad demanded that they tell him where Rick was, but they refused. When my dad turned to get back into his truck, the men tried to gang up on him. As I said before, my dad is a big guy and grew up fighting. He handed them their asses. 2 broken noses, and the other one lost his front teeth. He told them to let Rick know that he would find him if anything else happened. Several years went by very quietly. We made a life as a close-knit family. But when we were around 15 and 16, things started up again. By this point, Rick had started and failed several businesses, gotten married twice, and had children of his own. With mouths to feed, he had taken a job as a manager at the local grocery store. I was at driving age by this time, and it wasn't uncommon for my mom to send my sister and I to the store while she worked. We always enjoyed this, because it gave us a chance to play our loud music and talk out of our mom's earshot about things she really wouldn't have wanted to hear. You know, typical teenager drama. The first time we went in and Rick was working there, he easily recognized us. I look more like my mom than my sister does, whereas my sister is the spitting image of my father. Plus, it's a small town. It wasn't hard for him to figure out who we were. And when he did, he followed us through the whole store. Every time we turned down an aisle, he would be there, with the creepiest smile on his face. We had no idea who he was. We were practically babies when the pictures and letters had been sent to our mailbox. It was a topic that our parents had understandably not talked about in front of us. It wasn't until we were in our late teens that we were told the whole truth. Rick stopped us at the end of every aisle and would ask us questions, like if we knew what day our mom's birthday was, and if we liked the same things that she did, and if we got along with our father. He told us how pretty we looked and how much we resembled our mother. We brushed most of it off We were used to being recognized by people in town that knew our parents. Most of the time they would just say things like, "Oh, I know your mom," and never introduce themselves beyond that, so this didn't strike us as weird. It was the shower of compliments about our looks and our figures that made us uncomfortable. We rushed through the store as fast as we could to get away from him and back home. We didn't say anything to our parents. Both of them are overprotective, and we didn't want to stir up any trouble. Stupid idea, I know. Boy, do I know. Because this became a weekly ritual for almost a year. Every week, we would be sent to the store for groceries, and Rick would be there, following us around. No one said anything, even though the cashiers would look at him funny as he stood in the checkout line with us, staring at us and talking non-stop. It got to the point that we would be in tears when we got outside again, but there wasn't a word said. Maybe the other people in the store were worried about being reprimanded, since he was the manager. Maybe they were afraid of him. I don't know. But when we finally did tell our parents, they were furious. Not so much with us, but about what happened to us. We stopped going to that store and started shopping at the Walmart in the next town over. My grandfather met with the store owner, and Rick lost his job. Things went quiet for a few years. Occasionally we would see him in town, and when we did, we would try to avoid him the best we could. Sometimes he would sneak up and try to talk to us. Being raised on the tradition of Southern hospitality, we couldn't just ignore him without feeling like we were committing a sin, so we tried to keep it as brief as possible. The compliments still came, bizarre and entirely unwelcomed, but neither of us knew how to handle them other than saying, thanks, before leaving quickly. Time went on, and we attended college pretty far away from our hometown, where there wouldn't be a chance of him running into us. But he was still a presence in our lives. When Facebook finally became popular, he was there, trying to send us friend requests, sending us messages asking us how our mom was doing, and how we were doing in school. We both blocked him. But he somehow found our email addresses. It wouldn't have been hard for him to get them. He just had to ask the right people, and we never thought that we had to guard that information. Both of us were bombarded by emails from Rick, asking us the same questions again about our parents, and talking about how much he looked forward to seeing us, quote, at home. The worst one was an email sent to me, asking me to let my mom know that all she had to do was tell him she was leaving my father, and he would divorce his current wife, abandon his children, and marry her, and that he would be the father that my sister and I deserved. I blocked him immediately and called my sister to let her know so she could be on the lookout. My mom doesn't have an email address, so he couldn't harass her like that, but the heavy breathing phone calls came back for a while. And when we all got cell phones, we did not give out our numbers to anyone except immediate family or people that we could trust, and told them not to give out our numbers to him under any circumstances. Which brings me to the most recent event, and the reason I've decided to sit down and write this out. I've moved back to my hometown, fresh out of grad school and newly married. Things have been quiet for a long time. Rick was the furthest thing from my mind. My husband and I had to stop by Walmart to pick up some last-minute gifts for Christmas. We split up in the store, and I was just coming out of the restroom. My mind was focused on my phone, trying to call my husband so I could find him in the big supermarket, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Distracted, I turned around and almost dropped my phone when I realized I was standing face to face with that son of a bitch, Rick. He grinned at me and said, "Well, hello there. Been a long time." I'm ashamed to admit that I couldn't do more than just stare at him. He snuck up on me, and I was so startled and freaked out that I couldn't say a word. He leaned in, still wearing that damn smile on his face, the one he used to wear when he would follow my sister and I around the store. "You look just like your mom. If I was your dad, though, you would look more like me." I was frozen as he grinned at me for what was probably only a few seconds, but it felt much, much longer. I then turned on my heel and walked away, as calmly as I could. I put my phone to my ear and called my husband. It took everything I had not to burst into tears right then and there, in the middle of the store. My husband knew all the stories, and he was ready to come and beat the crap out of Rick for saying anything to me, but I ushered him out to the car. I just wanted to get out of there and go home. When I told my parents about the incident, they became angry as well, and they still are to this day. It seems like no matter how much time passes, Rick is still hanging around like a boogeyman. It's not over, and I know that. It may never be over, but it does feel good to get all this out. I don't know what to make of his little declaration, or what else other than the obvious he might have been implying. It makes me sick to my stomach to think about it. What I do know is that I am very, very grateful that he certainly is not my father, because I can't imagine what my life would have been like growing up with him. This story is going to sound made up, but I swear it's true. In retrospect, I probably wasn't in any real danger. It could have been an elaborate prank, and there's probably some video out there of a frightened 18-year-old girl screaming her lungs out in a swimming pool. But if their aim was to scare me, well, I'd say they did too good of a job. This took place last summer, shortly after I graduated high school. I was on vacation with two of my best friends, Ashley and Randy. We were at the Disney Vacation Club on Hilton Head Island in South Carolina. I had been to Myrtle Beach several times before, but never here, so I was very excited. Also, my favorite movies are from Disney's Renaissance era, so this was going to be special for me. Things were going well for the most part. We swam in the pool, sunbathed for a while, and even ran into some friends of ours from high school on the third day there, who just happened to be staying at the resort as well. And we ended up having some drinks, non-alcohol, and playing some shuffleboard together. It was a lot of fun. On the way back to our room, we had to pass an area where a Pluto meet and greet was happening, and we had to dodge a bunch of families on their way to get in line for that event. However, I noticed something very odd as we made our way through the crowd. There was someone who was sitting on a nearby bench. They appeared to be dressed in casual clothing, but something that stood out about them was that they were wearing a full-sized Mickey Mouse mask, one of those vintage-style ones with a pale white face and black eyes, the one that people usually see in their Disney-related nightmares. If that wasn't creepy enough, the person wearing this mask seemed to be looking right at me. I only saw this for a brief moment, because another wave of kids was rushing toward the line, and we quickly had to maneuver around the crowd to prevent being trampled to death. I did get a chance to look back at the bench one last time before we left that area for good, but in typical horror movie fashion, the masked figure had disappeared. Later that night, we headed over to the beach house a mile down the road to do some more swimming. There were more meet and greets happening all over the resort, so we figured that the beach house wouldn't be that busy. We were right, as it seemed that aside from a couple of employees, we were the only ones there. So we made the best of it. But after a while, Randy discovered that she had forgotten her contact lens case in the hotel room. She wasn't supposed to be swimming with them, and she could feel her eyes starting to dry out. Ashley said her phone was about to die as well, so they were thinking about heading back to the hotel room. We had been there for an hour already, but with no one else around, it was very relaxing. "You two go ahead. I'll take the shuttle back and text you when I'm on my way." They asked if I was sure, and I reassured them that I would be fine. I just wanted to get some laps in and enjoy having this area all to myself for just a bit longer. It was shortly after they departed that I suddenly felt uncomfortable. For those of you who have never been, the beach house is surrounded by a small forest, and I suddenly had that dreadful feeling of being watched, and I didn't have to think too hard about where someone could be hiding. I swam to the edge of the pool. There was a row of those recliners you see by poolsides. I had left my belongings on one of them. Behind the row of chairs was the railing, and beyond that, the forest. Something was drawing me to this area, and after staring into the trees for about 5 minutes, I saw something. Among the trees, I spotted that unmistakable Mickey mask staring back at me. I let out an ear-piercing scream as soon as I saw it. The figure then began power walking toward me. I quickly swam to the other side of the pool and climbed out, racing toward the exit. I looked back one last time to see that the figure had reached the perimeter railing, but was just standing there, still staring at me. I ran and grabbed an employee. I must have sounded hysterical, but I told him what was happening and that my stuff was still by the pool. After grabbing me a towel, he told me to wait and that he would go check things out. 3 minutes later, he returned with my bag. Here's your stuff. I didn't see anyone else out there, but I'll let security know about what happened. I was traumatized, and I had him call the shuttle to come pick me up. When I got back to the hotel room, I didn't say anything to Ashley or Randy. I didn't want to scare them and ruin our vacation. It was just some creepy weirdo in a mask, going around trying to scare people. However, there is one last thing about this that still gives me the fucking creeps to this day. When I got my bag back that night, I immediately checked to see if anything was missing, and everything still seemed to be there, including my wallet. But it wasn't until we were heading back home that I noticed something off about my driver's license. My picture had been defaced with a permanent marker. A pair of mouse ears was drawn on top of my head, with a crude smile over my mouth. Whoever was behind that mask has seen my license, with my full name and address on it. That is something that still keeps me up at night. It's been about a year since this happened, but I'm still afraid to look out my bedroom window at night, afraid to see that pale, soulless face staring back at me.